My team generated 80% of the company's profits. We were the backbone, the engine that kept it all running. But when I walked into the CEO's office after closing the biggest deal of my career, I didn't expect what happened next. Tasha, the CEO, fired me, just like that. After everything I did, after everything we built. I was supposed to walk away quietly, take my severance, and disappear. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I had the evidence, proof of embezzlement, fraud, and the lies that ran deeper than anyone could imagine. The board was about to freak out when they realized what was really going on, and I was going to make sure they knew the truth. My name is Ryan Edwards. I'm 38 years old, and I've spent the past 10 years at Prisma Tech, rising through the ranks, leading a team that generated 80% of the company's profits. You read that right, 80%. My team was the lifeblood of this business, the engine that kept everything running. From securing the largest contracts to overseeing high-stakes client negotiations, we did it all. We didn't just hit targets, we smashed them. I was the director of sales, and my team's performance had become legendary within the company. We were the go-to department, the one every other team turned to for support. Our results spoke for themselves. In the last quarter alone, we brought in over $25 million in revenue, 80% of the company's entire profits. We were at the top of our game. But that didn't matter in the end. It was a Friday morning when I got the call from Tasha Walker, the CEO of Prisma Tech. Tasha was the kind of CEO who loved to put on a show, smooth talker, polished, always looking for the next big thing. She had an MBA from Harvard and a history of flashy deals, but she had never understood what actually made the company work. That was my department. I had put in the blood, sweat, and tears to get us to where we were, but I never expected what was coming. "Ryan, we need to talk." Tasha's voice crackled through the phone, her tone too calm, too detached. "Can you come to my office, now?" I didn't think much of it at first. It was a routine meeting, right? Or at least that's what I told myself as I grabbed my jacket and walked down the hallway to her corner office. I had just closed another big deal and things were looking up. I was riding high, but as soon as I stepped into her office, I felt it. There was a coldness in the air, something that wasn't there the last time we spoke. Tasha wasn't alone. Brian Dever, the CFO, was sitting across from her, his usual smug smile replaced by a tense frown. "Ryan, take a seat," Tasha said, her voice flat. I sat down, my mind racing. Something wasn't right. I had just brought in a new multi-million-dollar deal, and now I was being summoned to her office with Brian. They looked like they were preparing for something serious. Maybe the numbers didn't line up. Maybe there were issues I wasn't aware of. Tasha wasted no time. "Ryan, we've made the decision to let you go, effective immediately," she said. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, waiting for her to continue, thinking I had misheard her. But she didn't. The weight of what she'd just said settled in, and the shock hit me. "What?" I asked, trying to make sense of the situation. "Tasha, I don't understand. My team is generating the majority of the profits for this company. I've worked here for a decade. What's going on?" Tasha didn't flinch. "The board has decided that we need to pivot in a different direction. We're restructuring, and unfortunately your position no longer fits into the new strategy. We're going in a different direction." I could feel the anger rising inside me, but I stayed calm, barely holding it together. "You're firing me? After everything I've done for this company? After everything my team has done? You can't be serious." Brian, the CFO, finally spoke up. "It's not personal, Ryan. You've done great work, but the company needs to adapt. This decision comes from the top. The board's been looking at this for weeks." My heart was racing now, and the cold chill I felt earlier was no longer just a feeling. It was a reality. This wasn't about performance or results. This was about something else, something bigger. Tasha leaned forward slightly, her voice more controlled now. "Ryan, I understand this is difficult, but you'll receive a severance package and we'll assist with your transition. We appreciate everything you've done for the company." I didn't know how to respond. My brain was screaming. I was the one who'd fought through the toughest quarters, led the hardest negotiations, and delivered results time and time again. And now, just like that, I was being discarded. I stood up, my hands shaking. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I've had enough." I turned to walk out of her office, my mind spinning with 100 thoughts. But just as I reached the door, I heard her voice again. Ryan, she said quietly, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I paused, gripping the door handle tightly, my knuckles white. I turned slowly, my eyes locking onto hers. I'll make sure the board knows exactly what's going on here, Tasha. Don't think I'm just walking away quietly. You've made a huge mistake. I didn't wait for her response. I slammed the door behind me and walked out of her office, trying to keep my composure. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't look at it. I was done. The company had made a mistake. They had no idea what they were about to unleash. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, a storm of thoughts swirling in my mind. Tasha and Brian thought they had taken control of the situation by firing me. They thought I'd just walk away, take my severance, and disappear into the background like they wanted. But I wasn't going to let them get away with this. Not after everything my team and I had done for this company. I didn't call Claire. I didn't want to talk yet. Not about this. I didn't want her to hear the anger in my voice or the pain in my chest. Instead, I walked through the city, trying to clear my head, my hands shoved deep into my pockets as I focused on the rhythm of my footsteps. I wasn't going to go quietly. By the time I got home, Claire was sitting on the couch, waiting for me. Her face lit up when she saw me, but that expression quickly faded when she saw the look on my face. Ryan, what happened? Her voice was gentle, but I could hear the concern in it. They fired me, I said flatly, slumping into the chair across from her. After everything my team did, I built that team from scratch. We were the reason the company stayed afloat, and they just tossed me aside like I was nothing. Claire sat down beside me, placing a hand on my knee. What are you going to do? I looked at her, frustration welling up inside me. I don't know, but I'm not done. I'm not just going to walk away from this. That night, I stayed up late. I didn't want to let this go. I couldn't. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. How could they fire me? My team had been responsible for 80% of the company's profits. I had put in blood, sweat, and tears to make Prisma Tech a leader in our industry. And now I was being discarded because Tasha and the board thought it was time for a change. The next morning, I started digging. I gathered every email I had sent over the last few years, reports, updates, forecasts, projections, and reviewed them carefully. The numbers were undeniable. My team was the backbone of the company. We didn't just close deals, we generated revenue. Prisma Tech didn't make 80% of its profits from any other department. We had brought in contracts with the biggest tech firms with the most high-profile clients. Without us, Prisma would have been nothing more than another failed startup. I pulled out the company's financial statements that Tasha and Brian had approved, and began comparing them with the numbers I had in front of me. It didn't take long to see what was really going on. While my team was bringing in millions, the company's financials weren't as stable as they should have been. There were discrepancies, small but significant. Unaccounted expenses, unexplained transfers. It was all there, staring me in the face. I didn't know exactly what was happening, but I knew this wasn't just about me being fired. There was something else going on, something shady that no one wanted to talk about. I spent the next few days quietly gathering information. My team members were supportive, but they didn't know the full extent of what was happening. The young analysts, the sales reps, the project managers, they all trusted me. I had mentored most of them, and they looked to me for guidance. But I couldn't tell them everything yet. I had to be careful. I knew that Tasha and Brian weren't just trying to get rid of me. They were covering something up. And I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not without exposing the truth. The following week, I was contacted by Sandra Moore, one of the board members I had worked with closely during my tenure at Prisma Tech. Sandra was one of the few people at the company who actually understood the real value of my team's contributions. She was no stranger to the numbers and knew how hard we'd worked to keep the company in the black. I wasn't sure whether to trust her, but I knew she had the power to help. Ryan, her voice was steady, but there was an urgency in it. I've been reviewing some of the reports from your team. The numbers don't add up. The profits that you brought in, they're gone, disappeared. And I've heard rumblings that Tasha and Brian have been pushing for some drastic changes. I need to know what's going on. I didn't hesitate. I'm glad you called. I've been digging into the company's financials, and there's something wrong here. My team was the only reason we were profitable. But now I'm starting to see strange patterns. Misallocated funds, missing revenue, and unexplained transfers. I think Tasha and Brian are involved in something, and I'm going to find out what it is. Sandra was silent for a moment, digesting what I had said. If you've got the evidence, Ryan, I want you to bring it to the board. This is bigger than just you being fired. This could cost Prisma Tech everything. I could feel the weight of her words. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about saving the company I had spent my life building. I will, I said, my voice calm but determined. I'm going to take them down, all of them. Sandra gave a quick sigh of relief. Good, but be careful. Tasha and Brian have powerful allies on the board. If you're not careful, they'll bury this and blame it all on you. I knew the risks, but I also knew I couldn't let them walk away from this. I had the evidence now, enough to expose the corruption. It was time to take action. Later that evening, I gathered everything I had. Financial records, internal emails, transaction logs, and compiled it into a detailed report. This wasn't just a whistleblower complaint, this was the truth, and it was ugly. I wasn't going to be the fall guy in their scheme. I was going to make sure they paid for what they had done. At 2 a.m., I sent the email to Sandra, along with the board members who I trusted. I was done waiting. The next morning, I couldn't sleep. My phone was buzzing with texts and calls, but I ignored them all. I had sent the email. The board now had everything they needed. The question was, what would they do with it? By noon, I received a message from Sandra Moore. Ryan, I've been in contact with a few of the other board members. They're panicked. You were right. This isn't just about your firing, it's about something far bigger. We need to meet. Can you come to my office this afternoon? I didn't hesitate. I knew the board was on edge. Tasha and Brian had been running the company with an iron fist, hiding their mistakes behind polished presentations and vague promises. But the evidence I had sent to the board wasn't something they could easily sweep under the rug. There were too many inconsistencies, too many red flags. Prisma Tech was in deeper trouble than anyone had realized. When I arrived at Sandra's office later that day, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Sandra, along with Mia Patel, another board member I trusted, sat behind her desk. Both looked as though they hadn't slept. They were clearly shaken but relieved. I read everything you sent, Mia said, her voice a little unsteady. The financial irregularities are far worse than we anticipated. There's no way Tasha and Brian can cover this up. Sandra nodded. The money trail leads right to them. I've seen the emails, the payments to offshore accounts, the invoices marked as consulting fees. It's all there, but there's more we need to uncover. The question now is, what do we do with this? I crossed my arms. We expose them. We go to the authorities, the SEC, the IRS. If we don't act fast, this whole company is going to collapse under the weight of their lies. But we can't do that without more, Sandra said, biting her lip. We need a full investigation. The board is already split. Tasha and Brian have supporters here, people who don't want to see their names attached to any scandal. I could feel the urgency building inside me. I had been patient long enough, but this wasn't about playing nice. It was about protecting the company I had helped build. Then we take control. We organize an emergency meeting. We demand answers. They both nodded, but it was clear the battle ahead would be long and messy. The board members who had supported Tasha and Brian had deep ties to the company, and they weren't going to go down without a fight. It was going to take everything I had to make sure the truth came out. I'll help you, Mia said, her resolve hardening. But we need to move fast. The board meeting is in 2 days, and Tasha is already preparing her defense. I left Sandra's office feeling a mixture of hope and dread. I had allies, but I knew the stakes. If I didn't act quickly, Prisma Tech could be gone, and Tasha and Brian would walk away, scot-free, leaving the rest of us to pick up the pieces. That night, I spent hours preparing. I pulled more records, more financial statements, more emails that I knew would blow the lid off this thing. I couldn't let them escape justice. The company I had dedicated my life to was built on trust, and now that trust had been shattered. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The day of the emergency board meeting arrived, and I could feel the tension in the air as I walked into the boardroom. The room was full of board members, many of whom were dressed in their usual suits, polished and professional. But the undercurrent of anxiety was palpable. Tasha and Brian were already seated at the far end of the table, looking calm, almost too calm. As I walked in, I noticed the way their eyes flicked toward me. I could see the discomfort in their faces, the realization that they had no idea what I had uncovered. I was about to flip the table, and they knew it. Sandra and Mia were seated beside me, but they didn't say anything. They had already been briefed on everything I'd found. This wasn't about them anymore. This was about exposing Tasha and Brian for the frauds they were. The meeting began with Tasha's usual smooth talk. She smiled, addressed the board members, and assured everyone that the company was on track for another year of growth, even though the numbers didn't reflect that. She spoke in polished corporate jargon, masking the reality of the situation with buzzwords and half-truths. But I wasn't buying it. I had the proof, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't waste any time. "Let's get down to business," I said, my voice cutting through the room. "Tasha, Brian, you've been running this company into the ground for the past year. Your financials don't add up, and I have the proof." I slammed a stack of documents onto the table, watching as the room went silent. "I've compiled everything, the offshore accounts, the unapproved payments, the false invoices, and I know that both of you were behind it." Tasha's face remained impassive, but I saw a flicker of panic in Brian's eyes. He swallowed hard, shifting in his seat. "I have emails that show exactly how you've been hiding these transactions," I continued, opening a folder and pulling out printed emails. "These weren't just minor errors. This was deliberate. You've been diverting company funds into personal accounts, using fake consulting firms to launder money." Tasha stood up, her eyes narrowed. "Ryan, you're out of line. This is baseless accusation." "Is it?" I interrupted, my voice steady but firm. "Because these documents," I slid the stack of papers across the table, "say otherwise. I've seen your emails. I've tracked the payments, and now it's time for you to face the consequences." A murmur rippled through the board members as they flipped through the documents. There was no denying it. The evidence was irrefutable. Sandra spoke up, her voice strong. "This is true. We need a full investigation. The board cannot stand by while this company is being destroyed." The room erupted into chaos. Some members were trying to defend Tasha and Brian, but others were already reaching for their phones to call for an emergency audit. It was clear the tide had turned. Tasha's face was flushed with anger now. "You're making a mistake, Ryan," she spat. "You think this will help you? You'll ruin everything, your career, this company. You won't get away with this." I locked eyes with her, my resolve unwavering. "You're the one who's ruined everything, Tasha, and I'm not the one who's going down for it." The boardroom was now a battlefield. The chaos that erupted after I presented the evidence was louder than I'd ever imagined it would be. Tasha and Brian were scrambling, trying to put out the fire I had just set. But it was too late. The board members who had once blindly followed them were beginning to turn. Their whispers grew louder, their fingers pointing toward the evidence I had presented. It was clear now. This wasn't about whether the company would survive. It was about whether the people who had been siphoning off its profits would. Tasha's usual confident demeanor had evaporated. She was pacing in front of the board, trying to regain control, but it was clear she was losing her grip. Brian, on the other hand, remained silent, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, his face pale. "You don't understand," Tasha finally said, her voice shaking slightly. "This isn't just about money. You'll ruin everything. You'll destroy the company." I couldn't hold back a small laugh. "You already did that, Tasha. You and Brian. You thought you could get away with it, cover up the fraud, keep the profits for yourselves. But now the truth is out. And there's no turning back." Sandra, who had been silently watching the fallout unfold, finally stood. "I second what Ryan is saying. We need a full investigation, starting with Tasha and Brian. I've already reached out to external auditors who can take over the review. This is no longer just a corporate decision. It's a legal matter." The room grew quiet, and I could see some of the board members nodding in agreement. But then Elena Gregory, one of Tasha's closest allies on the board, stood up. "We don't have enough information to make accusations like this. This could destroy Prisma Tech. We need to consider the consequences." I could feel the heat rising in my chest. Elena was scared. They all were. But they had no idea how deep the corruption ran. "The consequences," I said, my voice cold, "are already here. If we don't act now, the company's reputation will be destroyed. I've already shown you the evidence. We either take control of this now, or it's too late." Eleanor hesitated, glancing around the room at the board members who had started to look uncomfortable. The tide was shifting. The power had moved from Tasha and Brian to me and my allies, and I wasn't going to back down now. "Ryan's right," said Mia, a long-time board member I had worked closely with. We need to act now, or we risk losing everything. This is bigger than any one person, any one department. This is about the future of Prisma Tech. The energy in the room had completely shifted. The board members who had been loyal to Tasha were now starting to murmur in agreement. One by one, they began to nod. "All right, Ryan," Tasha said, her voice a little more resigned now. "You want to go to the authorities? Fine. You think you're going to get away with this? You're wrong." I met her gaze steadily. "You won't. I'll make sure of that." For the first time in the entire meeting, Tasha looked defeated. Her eyes flashed with rage, but she didn't say anything more. Brian, on the other hand, seemed to be calculating his next move, but there was nothing he could do to save himself now. The room was filled with tense silence as the board members began to file out, each one murmuring their own concerns. Some were talking about the upcoming investigation. Others were worried about the fallout, but no one was questioning the fact that Tasha and Brian had to answer for their actions. In the days that followed, the fallout from the board meeting was immediate and far-reaching. The external auditors went over everything with a fine-tooth comb, and the financial discrepancies I had pointed out were just the tip of the iceberg. There were unauthorized transfers, hidden accounts, fake contracts, and a network of lies that had been carefully constructed over the course of several years. The investigation revealed that Tasha Walker and Brian Deaver had embezzled millions from the company, laundering funds through bogus consulting firms and inflating invoices to siphon money for themselves. By the end of the week, the authorities had been notified, and the legal process was set in motion. Tasha and Brian were both placed on administrative leave, pending the results of the investigation. It wasn't long before the company's leadership began to collapse. Tasha was officially removed from her position as CEO and replaced by an interim leader chosen by the board. Brian, the CFO, was also ousted. Their futures were uncertain, with both of them facing potential criminal charges. As for me, the board reached out with an offer. They wanted me to return, not just as a member of the leadership team, but as Chief Operations Officer, with full control over the restructuring efforts. The offer was lucrative, and it came with full support from the board, but it wasn't just about the money. I wasn't taking this position for financial gain. I was doing it to fix the mess they had created. I walked back into the Prisma Tech offices a week later, this time with a new sense of authority and determination. I wasn't just returning as a former employee. I was returning as the person who had saved the company from its own collapse. The staff knew what had happened. Word had spread fast. They saw the new leadership taking charge, and they knew the company was headed in a new direction. My team, the one that had been with me from the start, stood behind me as we began rebuilding. It wouldn't be easy, but we had the resources and we had the resolve. Tasha and Brian may have thought they could destroy everything we built, but what they didn't realize was that Prisma Tech was stronger than ever. And I wasn't done yet. I would make sure the company flourished once more.